Good afternoon. Welcome to MIDC's Walks and Talks series. My name is Mark Rupert. I'll be your host this afternoon. The topic of the talk will be Unforgettable Hotel Experiences. Giving the talk today is our guest, Diane Thorsen. Diane is a Middle East hospitality design director and principal in the international architecture firm Gensler, and she's based in Dubai. Hi, Diane. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us today. Before we get started, I just want to say one thing. If you guys can leave your comments and questions, the Q&A on the side while we're having the talk afterwards, we'll get to them. We'll try to get to all your questions. With that, over to you, Diane.
Thank you so much, Mark, and really great to, thank you, Mark. I'm unmuted, I believe. And fantastic to be here today. Thank you so much for this invitation. Fantastic to actually have these conversations and discuss something which I know is really close to your heart, which is essentially how do we create these unforgettable experiences for guests. I know your tagline is creating these unique experiences that celebrate and enhance ecosystems. So great discussion for today, and looking forward to having this conversation. But wow, what a year it's been. It's been a year like absolutely no other. But one of the things that actually Gensler has, which is really extraordinary, is a research institute and analysts who actually look at trends that are happening within this time period. So I hope to share some of this with you today, shifts around the global perspective, a little bit about what is happening with all of the different disciplines within hospitality, retail, just shifts and changes and how they are all cross-pollinating with one another, which is really interesting. And what design can do to actually influence and change essentially designing for the experience. So we know obviously that it's everyone's dream at the moment to travel and explore the world. I mean, we literally long for that. So, you know, this is a time where we need to be looking outside of the box a little bit and understanding what it is that we can do that really, really makes a difference. So sustainability, you know, it's something that's really a key topic for the hospitality market and actually for all projects going forward. You know, we often forget that the most extraordinary experiences are actually designed by nature. You know, if we just look at the ambitious projects that are happening in Red Sea development, for example, pristine coastline, they have these sustainability principles. And I really look forward to seeing how this contributes to the ecosystem, because there's just such a fine balance of play that we don't destroy, you know, the beautiful nature that is there. And one of the things that we specifically looking at, and I hope that, you know, we can engage with developers and other architects and designers to actually see how we can really lead the way to protect ecosystems. I think, you know, this is absolutely key. So, you know, talking about experiences and, you know, what really makes the difference to experiences. And I think, you know, we understand that what we're looking at is really all of the smallest touch points, you know, from looking at a wine label, the tiniest little wine label, as part of the experience, to the tallest building in the world. You know, this is something that we actually look at. So, you know, talking about these key kind of experiences and these touch points that we speak of, don't ever forget the kind of impact that a brand, that a logo, that a color palette, that any of these small little, what we consider small little elements, actually really influence and shape an experience. So, you know, here we see things how a logo that is designed, all of these small little nuances reinforces an experience. Things like how a menu is designed, elements like the colors that are selected, all of these small touch points actually contribute to this experience. So obviously, I mean, we're here today, you know, talking about hospitality and you know, what this means. And, you know, we're very fortunate to be, you know, in an extraordinary global design company, literally designing from the labels to the tallest buildings and, you know, everything else in between. And we refer to this as, you know, creating moments of visual interest and joy. So, you know, a really fantastic opportunity to look at design and, you know, how this influences everything. But we see from our research institute team, we actually now have a really interesting insight where every single touch point impacts an experience. And we know from the research actually that to shape the future, there are three key things, like, you know, this image that you're seeing here, which is the novelty aspect. So three things we're going to look at: novelty, involvement, and then social interaction. And novelty often, you know, can be as simple as doing something like, you know, I can't believe I just did that, to experiencing something or learning something and being able to then go back from your trip to actually discuss, you know, what I've learned about my trip was that, for example, this experience, which is a design that our team actually did, which includes a Hillary and Tenzing room. Now, I mean, we can talk about, well, the room as an experience is, you know, from an Instagrammable moment, which we know is all key to the experience of a hotel, but really coming away learning something about an adventurer and the story behind these kinds of spaces. Discovering that, you know, Hillary was actually a beekeeper, and, you know, part of what he did for the ecosystem that he was in at the time was really looking at how he could involve Sherpas. So, you know, this room is not just a room, it's not just a space, it's actually part of the storytelling. You know, it's really key to everything that we're looking at. The second one is involvement. So, you know, involvement is something that I think is something we can all consider, you know, when we're looking specifically about, you know, how we can create experiences that are just extraordinary. So one of the things that is so interesting for me is when we have conversations with our global team, and I speak, for example, to our Japanese team, and we talk about sustainability, we talk about wellness, and they're always so amused when we speak about wellness, because for them it's not a novelty, it's actually part of their lifestyle and part of their culture. So one of the most extraordinary things is, you know, they offer this sandbathing as an experience in a lot of the hotels, and this is something where you basically get buried in sand. The temperatures are around 50 to 55 degrees. It's a 300-year-old tradition, which I think is really extraordinary, and it uses the steam, you know, welling underneath the beach to create these temperatures, and then you lie and relax in this environment, and it's really about just building a team, an experience which actually then boosts your immune system. So, you know, when we talk about how do we craft experiences for guests, how do we design for them, we're really looking at what is at the essence of what these retailers or hoteliers or operators are trying to achieve from an involvement point of view. So, you know, can we involve local crafts? Can we become multi-diverse? And how can we craft experiences that are contemporary? So this one, for example, which is the Banana Leaf, is a family-run Indian restaurant. And they really wanted to create this brand image that was contemporary, but a dining experience that actually spoke to its location, which is actually in Singapore. But how can they take their branding and their story into something that really creates an extraordinary experience for guests. And again, from the choice of the furniture to the branding, to the integration of lighting and planting, all of these actually add to the experience. And we can involve a number of different people in creating these spaces and building these spaces. The Diplomatic Quarter Mall, which is a project that we're working on as well, involving a variety of experiences where there's a lot of crafting, indoor and outdoor types of experiences. So obviously inspired by the wadis and movements of wind and water through crafting spaces, but more importantly is changing the face of how retail and these F&B experiences actually become more fluid type spaces where you become connected with the outdoors, and the buildings craft and create shading so that you can actually use the external areas, using local materials and craftsmen, and basically just representing the language of part of the culture. So the next is social interaction, and we all know, the social interaction is something that, is really key. Everything becomes an Instagrammable moment, everything is recorded, and we live in the social media kind of environment. So this is really key for marketing and branding and getting the name out there. But guests are really changing what they are expecting now. They are looking to move away from, this just box type hotels that look and feel the same. And they actually really want to connect, and the social aspect of connecting after this year has become so much more crucial to how we actually are connecting with people. So some really interesting examples, which I really love of what Gensler has done, is this music library and Understage. Now, not a hotel, but could so easily be in a hotel, and actually really works to connect people, because this is what we are craving now. But not only connecting people, it's also about actually creating a connection with culture and curating music. And this is such an extraordinary project because it allows different lounges for musicians and artists to kind of connect. It has a library where it informs guests. So imagine having something like this in our part of the world, where it's really telling the story of the culture, and there's so much more to what meets the eye. So, that social interaction is not only people meeting people, it's actually educating and informing, which I think just opens so many opportunities for hotels. Another one, the Music Box, which in San Diego, which essentially is just an extraordinary space. And what the client had in mind was this, just taking a space timeless, which actually just attracts a number of different opportunities for people to actually share their skills and their music abilities in an environment like this, which is really wonderful. It's almost a combination of hospitality, theatre, dining, viewing, fashion runways. It's a number of different things. So really just an amazing opportunity, and opens up just our thinking process around how can we integrate this kind of concept into guest experiences for hotels. Again, Tide House, which is another one where it's really looking at the history. And I know when we're looking at Red Sea development and we're looking at all of these projects in Saudi, which is really extraordinary to see what they're looking at doing, but how do we actually reflect the history, the culture of a place? How do we integrate these into different elements which actually reflect the history and what's come from and what's been inspired within the region? So, looking at those three sort of key elements, now we're moving on to something which is completely different that our analysts came back with. And Gensler has this research institute. So what they do is they basically study the market to understand what the shifts and trends are happening. And what they've come back with essentially is this need for a higher level of customer service. So what does that mean to us? What do we need to deliver and what do we need to do? Essentially, it's really these key things. Number one is safety, of course, which we know. The other is really focusing on personalized experience, because there is such a risk now of hotels as they bounce back, and absolutely they will bounce back, and we will have vaccines and things will move again. The personalized experience is going to become something that's really, really key. The other is unique experiences. People are craving this more so than ever when they start to travel again and when they move out of the staycation mode. How and what can we offer as an experience that is completely unique and crafted? The other is the tech savvy part. How can we not lose the personalized experience, but remain tech savvy, and what influence would this have? And then the last is, the health and wellness aspect. And the health and wellness is something which I think is going to just become so much more, key to every single aspect that we look at. So let's just take a look at a few of these. Number one, safety. Safety has actually become the new luxury. And it's really not just about people feeling secure and safe when they enter, and touchless surfaces and all of these kinds of things, which I think are going to really just become a positive impact, and it's going to increase hygiene levels. It's going to change a lot of things. But how do we actually create the safety aspect without becoming too intrusive? And I think here we can learn a lot from the medical profession, what they're doing, how they're interacting, and what kinds of facilities and technologies are being applied there. But the guest room obviously, remains really key. So one of the things that we're seeing when it comes to safety is the guest room changing totally from surfaces where we're using carpets, and there's a lot of surfaces and throw pillows and all of these kinds of things, that's being moved away completely. More minimalist designs, very simple surfaces, easy to clean, very, again, just crafted experiences. So moving on to personalization, which I think is, a topic that hoteliers are really looking at now, because creating unique experiences has obviously always been, major part of hospitality. But we can't just cover the basics anymore. It's really a question of crafting these kinds of experiences. Really means that the hotel staff have to really become so focused on how they can actually understand their customer base. What kinds of experiences can the guests be offered, and really focusing on, what makes the difference for each individual. So how can it be absolutely crafted? So we challenged our own team with this project that you see here on the screen, which essentially is called the Wandering Nomad. So we were obviously inspired by how could we change a guest room to be a guest experience where we essentially look at how the nomads used to travel. Could we change the wardrobes, for example, to be something that is more crafted, personalized? Could we offer a service where the guest's luggage is essentially opened and packed in this way, where it's actually positioned in a wardrobe like this that you see on the screen, that can then be closed away? And would it be possible that when the guests are brought into their room, they actually don't see a bedroom at all? They see what you see here, which essentially is a living room. So could spaces become smaller, but more personalized, messages that greet a guest with artwork that reflects the local nature and the local ambience. And then actually that would reveal a bed, which is then made up as a Murphy bed, which drops down in the evening and becomes something as a completely different service. Again, just looking at trends and what's happening, the business traveler is really going to make huge changes, and there's a lot of demand for what's happening in business travel. Travel is going to resume, possibly not to the same extent, but when people do travel, what they want to be able to do is actually find and make a space where they can work, that can become their own personal space. So we're seeing designs crafting areas which is almost like a blurring of the WeWork and workplace kinds of spaces where people can meet informally on sofas, they can meet at tables, they can host meetings, they can integrate technology, and all of this in an environment where they can actually use the space as they choose. So flexibility, especially when we're talking nice, we're talking about how can we actually craft and change these experiences that become something, completely different. The integration of F&B is becoming more and more of the kinds of spaces that guests are looking for again, where people can work and where people can just relax, and they can order their crafted barista to make them their own latte, and they can move and work in different kinds of spaces. So we see this as being something that most hotels need to now cater for, because the lobby is actually becoming the space where people actually will commune, and this will bring people back to using the hotels as like the center of a community. So travel again, what do we look at as hotels which are linked with the airports, and how can we integrate that kind of service that actually speaks specifically to travel and what people are looking at in these interim passing through moments, that it can still become the most extraordinary experience. And this is obviously a hotel that is positioned to capture the travel trade, but it doesn't feel like I'm just here. It can really become, the most extraordinary experience, and that's really what we're looking to achieve. So not just a pass through. Then the other is what we're looking at is the tech savvy, and here there's really a risk of us actually losing that social and personal connection. So this is something that obviously needs to be looked at as what best suits the brand. And more specifically in the case of like these luxury properties, that the human points are maintained, because tech can actually, it can really be a positive. The mobile check-ins and outs, the integrated hotel apps, the contactless environments, all of these are really essential to elevate the customer experience. And I think these are going to become a standard in the industry. But we really need to be very aware of, at the end of the day, this is really something which is just about the touch points and personalized human connection. So, really a fine balance. So this is not a hotel, but what's interesting for me are the changes that are happening with technology and the opportunities that this lends for an experience, and in particular, an immersive experience. So Cadillac House, a project that we looked at, almost the concept of a runway type of environment where center stage is obviously the vehicle, but what's more interesting is the use of technology on columns to do messaging. It can be, the arrival of a guest, it can be a number of different things, or completely immersive experiences where guests are interacting and connecting with this actual story and the narrative and, you know, the storytelling around these aspects. And then obviously this, you know, to a point where it becomes so completely immersive that the guest actually becomes part of the exhibition. And I think, you know, this is something that is really, really interesting. How can this be used? Obviously, it's very key to what specific types of brands. Obviously, you know, when we're looking at the very connected with nature types of brands, this is not relevant at all. But when you're looking at, you know, what are the opportunities and just pushing the boundaries, I think this is really an extraordinary opportunity. So then to touch on health and wellness, which obviously is, you know, something that I'm particularly interested in, and most hoteliers are saying, you know, how can we actually integrate this health and wellness, and how can we offer really unique ways for people to stay super active and healthy, especially during times like this? And how can we put personalized exercise and nutrition plans in place? You know, is there an opportunity, and are we missing something when it comes to that return? You know, can these spaces actually generate revenue from integrating these? Because often we'll hear from operators that spas don't necessarily generate enough revenue. So, you know, how can we make this part of the experience? Well, one of the most interesting things for me was this hotel, which we designed, which actually is very, very simple, is actually about an integrating personalized experience with an activity that's really healthy and actually becomes part of the experience of actually learning a skill. And they remained active and booked, and they are 80% booked through this time, where people have actually managed to just go and actually surf within this zone. So, you know, here, very, very simple, very clean finishes, but actually it's all based on what people are learning, being engaged with nature. So these kinds of things, nature trails, all of these kinds of aspects are something that we're encouraging hoteliers to look at, to become part of the story and part of the narrative that actually allows us to rebound as an industry. And then by contrast, you know, the urban hotels are also absolutely key to our fabric and becoming the center of community again, and how we can essentially focus on LEED. This is LEED Gold, and rather than it just becoming a checkbox, you know, looking at something which really focuses on how we can actually make sure that we're not only designing sustainable hotels, but we're actually providing something that really allows guests to understand, you know, what is connected. So the other unique experiences, you know, which is also part of the storytelling that we are all part of the creation of, is how guests are really craving this as part of their experience. So, you know, what does this mean? It's not purely that guests will be looking at only the experience. It's about actually just embracing the local culture, you know, in understanding how we could really tailor the guest needs. It may be things like, you know, we'd refer to this sandbathing. It may be, in our part of the world, you know, an extraordinary experience is, you know, camel rides out into the desert, night camps, you know, any of these kinds of things. But it also actually involves engaging with the community to include craftsmen in crafting furniture pieces, etc., that people will come away being able to have purchased something that was crafted by a local, because that's what people want to do. They want to go back and say, I learned this, or I experienced this, or did you know that they do this in the Middle East? Do you know they do this in Japan? And it's all about the storytelling when you return. So this hotel, which is really interesting, is actually really cool, you know, talking about the unique experiences. And they've created different kinds of suites for, you know, one called the Adventurer, another called the Thrillist, another called the Night Owl. And they've crafted these kinds of spaces, which are really, really simple, but connected with this is the experience that the hotels are offering. So, you know, the Night Owl will be a completely different kind of character. They will have events that happen in the evening. Obviously, the Thrillist are the offering opportunities where people will go home and say, I can't believe I just did that kind of experience. And so this is all part of, you know, how we can craft these really meaningful opportunities. So the same thing when we're looking at, you know, local experiences, and, you know, the local experiences being things that are, you know, not only just the experience, but I think it's connecting with the community, designing, you know, unique furniture that's been handcrafted in the location, understanding, you know, are there things that are specific to the region, you know, tea that comes from a region, and how can that become part of the story? Individually designed spaces that refer to the locale, always with functionality, of course, at front of mind, but, you know, the local food cooking classes, the food packages, local tastings, all of these kinds of, you know, creating the VIP experience, and, you know, all of these kinds of local experiences really become part of the hotelier's revenue opportunity. What was really interesting that we discovered through our research institute was only 20% of experiences are available as bookable online, which I find really, you know, extraordinary. And I think, you know, this is something that, you know, we could completely change and craft things differently. So something else that we looked at within our team is it possible to create the IKEA hotel space that could be a flat pack modular system that could literally be crafted and built on site without basically touching the environment. Totally sustainable, solar powered environments that you could just create and craft and build and drop into different locations and build it as you like, with or without vegetation, and craft something, you know, just really extraordinary. And how can the story of these kinds of spaces where, you know, it's on the luxury end, how can all of the artwork within these spaces, the designs of the carpets and all of the different elements become part of the language and part of the referencing of coming away, having learned about the local art, the local story, just understanding. I think that's part of one of the gifts that we can have as an experience, is really just, you know, understanding what it's all about. So using timbers from the area, or you know, different elements that just allow us to be engaged, and a space where you can relax afterwards. So those are some of the key things that, you know, we've looked at. Now, what I want to just touch on are these hospitality findings and the trends that are happening, because obviously, you know, we see that there's such a shift that's happened in consumer behavior. And, you know, the hospitality findings and the trends that our research institute came back with was quite interesting for us. But, you know, not necessarily that it's going to shape and change the experiences, but I think what's really important for us to understand is, you know, what are the expectations. So that guests don't necessarily want hotels to change everything. I think that's really, really key. They do expect that key measures will be put in place, so limiting interaction or addressing things like, air circulation. And all of these, again, link back to WELL and LEED. So the more that we apply these in hotels, the better facilities we'll craft and create. The things like, staff wearing masks, obviously, I think, that's going to continue even post-vaccine until people really feel comfortable. Most of people are, happy to travel, but currently people will only travel by car because there's still the staycation, which is happening, mostly in our part of the world. Although I think our region has really done phenomenally to open up travel, and it almost feels, I'll say almost feels like we're moving towards being normal. But what was really interesting is, of the people that we surveyed, which was really global, most people are thinking, I'm definitely going to travel and I'm definitely staying at a hotel, and I'm definitely, going to be absolutely fine staying overnight. I'm a little bit cautious about using the amenities in the common areas, but I don't essentially have an issue. So let's look at capitalizing on local travelers. I think that was really the key thing from our institute, saying, look, this is essentially what's happening. Obviously now customer behavior, looking at that and what's happening, there's such a difference in booking trends. It's almost that, we'll see a change in booking trends being almost like lastminute.com kind of booking, almost on the spur of the moment. So, we really see that as a large shift happening in consumer behavior, and that's really going to drive things going forward. The sustainable lifestyle and the sustainable experience is going to be something, that also drives enormous change in consumer behavior. And what does that mean? It means, really looking at people booking and making the choice of booking is actually more prevalent if people feel that there's a giving back to the community or becoming involved in something. We spoke earlier about the involvement. Involvement being something that, people really are aware now of the fact that this kind of crisis has impacted every single person. So if there's an opportunity to engage or become involved in the community where they're staying, that's going to drive a decision, which I think is really interesting. And then, the changes that we see we spoke about, the co-working opportunities. This is actually Hyatt's workspace, and you can see, how this is becoming integrated into, part of travel and hotel lobbies, which I mentioned previously. Opportunities for the social interaction absolutely need to be included in these spaces, but it's really about, creating those opportunities for the co-working, places to meet informally, coffee spaces, they're becoming more fluid, and these blended kinds of spaces that we see happening. So places where you can have informal meetings, lobby spaces where you can actually feel home from home. This is another trend that we see taking place largely. So, these are really, some of the key concepts that we've spoken about, when we're looking at, what are the concept trends. That's what we have received back from the Research Institute. We're really looking at, the key takeaways being absolutely simple and effective designs are becoming really key now because we've got to bounce back. That integration and concept of this touch of playfulness or the kind of quirkiness, things that will make people smile, something that you'll remember, a takeaway. And it's the small things again. Is it a postcard with a really interesting element that will, you'll remember to book again because that was something that's just memorable. What makes it memorable? The long stays away from home. Another concept of if you're going to travel, you may as well travel and work. This work anywhere revolution, we're seeing that as being something that we see as here to stay. And then, again, just using humor. Humor is something that I think has got us through this, and it's really something that will allow us to continue. So thank you for the opportunity, and I really hope that this has been of interest, and really interested to hear any comments, any thought processes, as we've shared some of this discussion with you today. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Diane. Thank you very much for that talk. It was very informative. Excellent. There are many questions. I'll start with the latest and go a bit backwards, I guess. You mentioned the long stay revolution. Definitely seeing that getting more and more prevalent. We're hearing about it anyway, especially with the younger crowd. Do you see that as not only staying but growing, effectively, possibly altering the hospitality view on it and the way it works and the design ultimately?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was really interesting, the findings, from the Research Institute, that's absolutely clear that that is a growing trend. It's going to completely transform how we as designers look, in particular at spaces and how we integrate the opportunity to be in a room, work in a room, eat in a room. Everything actually around the focus of design is going to shift to basically steer towards addressing that as what we see as an absolute growing trend that will be 100%, we believe, here to stay. When I say that, obviously we don't have the crystal ball, and it's really very much a question of, what trends are going to almost reimagine the offering, and what are the trends that are going to basically shift and change. We think, some of them will change the shape of all the social spaces, and flexibility being, the main key driver to be able to accommodate those kinds of shifts in the trend.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that that's very well spoken. You answered the question. Yeah, I do feel that the spaces though will end up being fundamentally more functional and reacting directly to the fact that they're not going to be a token for the business traveler. It's going to be for the general public usage, I think, in a very fundamental way. Going into the next question, did the Gensler research identify any opportunity for extending the guest stay either side of the typical check-in at 3 p.m. and check-out at 12 p.m., especially when guests only stay for one night? Should hotels adapt to allow guests to be there for longer before and after they have an assigned room?
Yeah, I think that's actually something that the Research Institute came back with as this is an enormous opportunity to create that kind of flexibility for extending. And again, it just it's an operational nightmare because it obviously can change on a whim. Especially as people start to travel and protocols might change, and how do you adapt and how do you become more agile is really something that prompted us to look for example, at that Nomad concept, the Nomad Room, because it means how can you actually adapt something really quickly to become that extended stay and have the guest comfortable. We've been recently working with a client where they actually came and then have ended up actually not having their premises ready, and they needed to extend their stay in a hotel. And so they've been working, living, taking phone calls in the bathroom, going out onto the patio, trying to do all kinds of things that have really been very challenging for them, because the hotel where they're staying is designed as a guest room for sleeping in. It's not designed as a room to work in, eat in, do yoga in, exercise in. So that's part of one of the things that I think is a great opportunity for operators, designers, for all of us to look at how can we create something that is total flexibility. And that basically comes down to just really innovative design that allows the guests to reconfigure and transform their spaces. And I think, that's something that to me is really exciting. And it could change the face of hospitality going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, it opens up a lot of doors if you allow that to become more of a bespoke experience, actually. Okay, next question. Okay, let's move away from the Four Seasons experience to ecotourism, health and wellness. Do you see this as a trend or something more substantial, or substantial cultural shift, more permanent cultural shift?
I absolutely hope and pray that this is a permanent cultural shift, because the sustainability aspect, I think, is so important to we have, and we've really recognized that ecosystems that we are impacting are very, very fragile, and we can either enhance those or we can completely destroy them. And I have so much respect for developers and owners who really look at what impact they're making and how they can actually move away from just paying lip service to not washing the sheets every day and not washing the towels and changing these kinds of things, to actually a far more sustainable long-term approach at a very, very deep, impactful level. Right from the choice of materials, all the way through to the systems that are being installed, the MEP systems, the using natural ventilation in parts of the world where we can really do that, how we can really craft and build things that are not just fast and flashy, but that are really truly sustainable with absolute care and attention to not destroying the natural habitat. And we're seeing that, we're seeing that move happening with developers, where that's actually at the core of what they are looking to do, provided that, the commercial aspects don't come into play and override that, which is always the fine balance. Seeing how we can actually achieve both. And one of the things that I would actually encourage all designers and developers to do is actually have a core sustainability team, which is what we've done. So we've identified key sustainability experts within each of our practice areas. So practice areas being hospitality and workplace and healthcare and all of these different practice areas. But at the core of all of them is somebody who's going to really push us to look at the sustainability practices that can easily be implemented. Because one of the first questions we are being asked is, if we're going to register for LEED or for WELL, what is this going to cost me? And, I like to actually say to clients, but what is it going to cost you to not do this? Because we've seen the trend happening that people will choose projects and choose to stay in places where there is a connection with an ecosystem or giving back to community or a sustainable approach.
Being responsible.
It's being responsible, and it's absolutely a key driver.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with what you're saying. There's one thing I just did want to bring up, though. I find it interesting that it's a bit like the Japanese story you gave earlier. Designers or architects historically sustainability and basic principles and understanding the environment was as a fundamental underpinning of your design, or should be. So it's funny that we've come into this day and age and sort of reassessed it like it's something we've been missing, which we have. We've sort of forgotten it a bit, but fundamentally in school, all designers, it should be a fundamental understanding in how you're designing and how you're thinking. But
I absolutely agree. Yeah, if you go back to, like the 300 years ago concepts, looking at, going back to the Japanese story, how they actually discovered that, this burying yourself in sand would raise your body core temperature, and it would allow the system, your immune system, to basically reboot itself, as it were, and build that is really an extraordinary thing. And I think there's so much of historical architecture, if we look at that if we just referred back to age-old, crafted materials and, using natural materials, but really designing in a sustainable way, there's so much that we've actually missed and lost. And I think, that is really interesting for us as architects and designers to challenge ourselves to actually say, how can we bring that back, and how can we actually look at that, particularly in this part of the world. I think there's so much innovation, and there is such a visionary kind of approach to design, but rather than being the fast and the flashy, how can we actually lead the way in terms of sustainability and vision, when it comes to that. I think that's really where our opportunity is.
Absolutely. Here's another one for you, regarding, or it's referencing back to the IKEA project you were showing a minute ago. Has Gensler been able to execute a project like that, as well as off-grid? Sure, there's something, but was it something particularly related to that, what you showed?
Yeah, well, what's actually really interesting is we've been working with a number of different suppliers to actually look at what products and what materiality is out in the marketplace. So, the IKEA concept was actually started as a very simple little pod unit, which actually, when I say pod, it's actually started out as an idea for creating these individual hydroponic pod structures that could be placed in unused locations. And we partnered actually with Milliken, and we asked, look, we want to create this very lightweight structure that's extraordinarily hard, lightweight, what do you have? They have a research team who have done, extraordinary materials. They've got concrete cloth that they've used, and they actually came back to us with this product, which is actually a very interesting, very lightweight product that's basically used for suitcases. And so we started looking at this material, and we actually figured that you could create very lightweight, very strong structures with this material that can be laser cut. It can have a number of different things done to it. It can be formed, and very easy to assemble. So, when we look at systems like that, absolutely it's achievable as an IKEA kind of concept, because it's about what material is used, and then it's basically, the challenge is getting the systems of the water supply, electrical supply, batteries, solar powered, etc. And so we actually crafted this kind of concept and have developed it and presented this to a couple of very forward-thinking operators and developers who are thinking, well, what if I created these easy to construct that we literally don't damage ecosystems, and it's really doable. So we look forward to actually building one of those. But it literally started with, looking at a system of this hydroponic, basically being able to grow vegetables and being able to sustain communities in these simple kind of structures that you could literally, almost like a plug and play. So there's so much opportunity to do that kind of thing in a really sustainable, innovative way.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump to the next question really quick here. You were speaking before about different, I guess, breakdowns about the way people experience the space. You sort of touched on Instagrammable moments. Do you think that this and other media using the technology essentially are changing the design drivers? Obviously, it's changing the way people view places. It's sort of a viral marketing tool, if you will. Is that affecting, and I'm assuming you're going to tell me yes, but I'm wondering in what ways and how deeply is it affecting your design drivers and how you view the design of spaces?
We live in a social media world, and it is absolutely, part of a marketing drive. One of the first questions we will always be asked, not only by hoteliers, but actually, I think every client that comes is, where are my Instagrammable moments? One of the questions that comes in. And that's where, the concept of creating something unique or something clever or something humorous or something out of the ordinary, as part of that novel aspect. What are guests looking for? They're looking for, oh my gosh, this is, this pandemic has been so awful. When I go back, these are the things that are absolutely going to be key for me. I want something novel. I want to be involved. I want to have the social interaction. And that falls into all three of them. It basically is involving people in the place, and then that is spread as a marketing tool. So yes, absolutely. From a design driver point of view, I think it's really a question of actually just finding those wow moments, which are just really touches that when you see the photograph of it, it really makes you want to travel there. And that's the whole purpose of that. And it gets the name of the place out there. And the more novel it is, or the more unusual or beautiful, or actually untouched even, that creates the opportunity for that. But it's definitely a trend that will stay until people stop using that platform and use something else. Which is happening as well.
Yeah, but it'll just migrate to another platform. The same concept, I think it is already. But are you finding that it's affecting your the way you create, as in you're starting to sort of frame the story a bit with the understanding of where this is going to go, if you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Happy accidents that people find and like, ooh.
Yeah. Oh, look at this amazing thing. So, I mean, one of the things that we, when we talk about design drivers, I think there are some really key things that we're looking at. Number one is always framing the view. We have, and particularly in our part of the world, this region, we have extraordinary views. And actually nature is the best designer. So what we always try and do is frame the view, bring the outside in, because that's absolutely key to an experience, and then creating those happy kind of moments that are fun, and we always look for what could we add in as a design feature that is going to make people use that little experience as a touch point to capture a moment, because that's really what travel is all about, capturing the moment and going back with a story.
Absolutely. All right, let's see here. We have another one for you. You mentioned blending spaces. Do you think this is a trend, or it's a change in our understanding of public spaces in the hotel and other areas, other public spaces, and how they work? example, Citizen M Hotel, might be an example of a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, Citizen M is an extraordinary project. I mean, just touching on a few things. One, the modular construction of it, which Gensler were obviously involved in, which completely changed construction methodology, which is extraordinary. But that's a fantastic example of blended spaces because it is everything. It becomes a retail space because you walk in, you identify with furniture ranges that are identifiable, that you can purchase. You can purchase everything, the artwork. So it's a retail space. It becomes a working space. It becomes very much a social space. People connect and actually it becomes their living room. They start to work in spaces and adapting spaces for what their purpose is, very flexible and very fluid. So the blended spaces concept is not only happening in hospitality, it's actually happening as a trend across all disciplines, design disciplines for us.
Yes,
we see it in workplace. Workplace hospitality is becoming part of that concept in workplace. We're designing spaces to be lounges with a barista that you can work in, with little quiet booths where you can go and hold meetings. We're designing hotels to become workspaces and retail spaces and spaces just to experience like the digital story. They're becoming immersive experiences and entertainment. Entertainment spaces are becoming theaters. So I really find that wonderful and exciting from a design point of view, because it really encourages us as designers and operators and owners, developers, everybody to really challenge our thinking in not just following the basic elements of here's a lobby, here's a guest room, here is a corridor. How can we actually change and shift these so that they can become little pockets within pockets? And I think that trend is 100% here to stay, because what we've been through and what we've experienced is actually that you can work anywhere, anytime, and that spaces you can adapt to suit your needs are the kinds of spaces that we're looking for.
You're seeing it as a bit of an evolution, perhaps, in our
absolutely design. Yeah, and it's really exciting. I think it's going to become more and more that way.
More understood and developed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then also people will become more adept at these spaces, and they'll evolve further from there. Yeah, absolutely. Here's another one for you. Long stay revolution. Do you see it as not only staying but growing, and do you see it affecting the hospitality industry and possibly, obviously, design?
Yeah, the long stay, I think, is 100%. We're starting to see already the shift in developers coming to us and saying, we're changing this development concept from this, which was going to be a hotel, to a long stay offering. And I think there's such an enormous demand for that, just given the way that the entire world is pivoting at the moment, and understanding that this is basically what we need to do to be able to survive, for the economy to survive. That you'll go into a location and you'll create that as a temporary long stay. And I think that's we're going to become, when we can travel again, mobile and active. And I think that long stay is going to be part of the offering that completely not only takes off, but becomes something that features new design concepts.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel that, especially with the pandemic and the way we're working now, it's sort of been proven effectively. People have confidence in it. It's just going to accelerate and enable people to stay and move elsewhere, different places, live in different locations, and still work.
And still function.
To one another.
Yeah. And what will drive the design on those is creating spaces that actually offer all in one, you know, the opportunity to have that long stay, be able to cook your own meals, being able to do your exercise routine, being able to actually do your yoga, you know, connect again to fresh air,
Keep
you
a
know,
healthy
all
lifestyle.
of the, keep a healthy lifestyle, you know, look at things like lighting for circadian rhythms. You know, those are the kinds of things that will shape and inform, you know, design going forward, which I think is really is really interesting for all of us, including, you know, the MEP engineers who we collaborate with, creating a space that's really healthy. You know, I think we see that as a trend as well. So it's not only I want to stay for longer, but I want to know that where I'm staying is the healthiest air, the healthiest lighting. If I have to work in different time zones, I want my sleep pattern not to be affected. I want to know that the water quality has maybe been infused with vitamin C. I want to know that it's really healthy and clean. So, you know, all of these like small elements become something that will drive the design going forward of these long stays.
I'm going to ask a question that sort of drives a little bit out of the presentation. Regionally, historically, there's been a certain design aesthetic or feel in the Middle East, in the UAE, that's sort of been attributed to the Middle East and the UAE. Sort of maybe not quite as the same as you might say if you went to New York, or if you went to London, or if you went to someplace else. I guess, do you feel that that is actually true, was true? Do you feel that's changing? Do you feel that the, what is your opinion?
Well, there was an idea associated with what makes an authentic design authentic. And I think this is actually a really interesting topic, and it actually can become an entire topic, because there are design elements as part of every culture that really represents what is an authentic experience. And there are some really beautiful, beautiful elements that are part of this culture. Unfortunately, I see it as being something that has been, there have been elements that have been overused, and they've become almost in a way a little bit pastiche rather than being authentic. And I think that's really, you know, unfortunate for this region, because there's such really interesting artists and art and people who represent this region in a more understated way, to immerse people in the culture and educate people around the culture. And what I would really love to see, and I do start seeing the shift happening, is that there's more of a return to what makes an experience authentic, rather than let's take this pattern and apply it on every conceivable surface and overdo it to a point where it actually loses its beauty. You know, there's just extraordinary, yeah, there's just, you know, I am absolutely intrigued by, for example, the geometric patterns that exist as part of this world, the carving, the shapes and the forms, the story of the arches, and, you know, the elements that have made up how things worked, you know, how the wind towers actually worked, not just the shape and form of them as something that's just applied, but actually what the concept was and how it really worked. You know, the concepts of the courtyards within the space, within, you know, this part of the world. The concepts of, you know, the materiality around the nomadic travelers, and, you know, the camel bags, and the tones and the textures, and, you know, all of these kinds of things. So I think one of the challenges that we face as designers and architects is not just taking the elements that become pedestrian and overusing them, but really looking for the authentic experiences. Number one, that is a partnership with the operators and owners, and And then essentially, how can we engage the community? So there's an extraordinary hotel, an owner that I met who's passionate about art. And what I absolutely loved was that he had given each floor of his hotel, which is an urban hotel here in Dubai, to a local artist. Can you imagine that as a local artist having a gallery of a floor in a hotel? And really, credits and kudos to that concept, because that just it creates this idea of actually, we can really give back to the community and we can support the community. It's authentic. People from the region, we're supporting something that is really part of the culture. It's people that have got homegrown talent, and it tells the story in a way like no other, like no pattern can, which, we may get completely wrong. So, from that, from that point of view, I think, I would say what I would love to see is the return to authentic at so many different levels, authentic, preserving the culture, preserving the experiences, making
authenticity in general,
local craft. I think a lot of that it could be lost. And when I'm talking craft, it's not only the craft of making items, it's also the craft of food. That homegrown vegetables is also, that authentic at so many different levels. So all of that relates to design and experience ultimately.
Yeah, you do see that in the ecotourism sectors. I mean, even regionally, you see that going, farm to table. That sort of concept is getting
absolutely
much more supported, or it's getting it's getting legs under it, basically.
It is, yeah, and I love to see that actually. There's so much produce that's grown locally, and actually it tastes better. It's much more flavorsome. It hasn't been in cold storage. It gives people job opportunities. It's personal. There's a story attached to the dish. So the farm to table thing, I think, is something, and that's what's actually that's what started our thought process of creating these hydroponic pods using this extraordinary material, was that these little pods could actually be in hotel environments, in unused spaces, but you could actually grow food in it that could, because this climate is crazy. So, how could we create these little mobile greenhouses to be able to allow people and communities to grow their own? That in itself, I think, is an extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah, there's actually a group that's associated with Masdar that's pursuing that very goal. They're actually creating these varying sized units, anywhere from like what looks like a wine cabinet to a container box. They're doing that very thing regionally, trying to get that. Yeah. Okay, one more question for you. Obviously, we know the pandemic has had a big effect on the hospitality industry. That one of those things you spoke of was the masks and spacing and all that, and hygienics and all that. But another one is domestic tourism, I think, which has really reshaped what at the moment they're seeing, hotels are seeing. Do you find that to be something that, and also I'll add to it what you mentioned were reactionary elements to design, like hygienics, making people have masks. But do you see design, your design, being affected in a greater capacity? Like, is it something that is going to be here for the short term, we'll call it, while it's happening, and we'll go back to normal? Or do you think there'll be long-lasting impacts that will fundamentally reshape or retool the way you design spaces? More I'll say, because you did touch on it. You said it was, the cleanliness and the hygienics, but more than that, perhaps.
Well, I mean, there are a number of questions in there. I think number one, the local travel. You know, the local travel, I think, is something that it's really forced us now to look at the opportunities around creating spaces and exploring around us before we actually look to travel abroad again, which is all part of what, you know, the Red Sea developments, the developments that are happening in Saudi, because they understood that they lost so much of their local tourism to people actually traveling abroad. So it's not only providing something for local travelers, but it's also encouraging more international travelers to come in and experience a local offering, which, you know, this part of the world has really extraordinary experiences. But, you know, regarding the safety aspect, which I think was the other thing that you touched on, that is fundamentally going to change approaches, and we see it already happening. We see brand guidelines and standards changing and things coming in where, you know, absolute carpets are no longer being used in guest rooms. All edges are being looked at as very simple, very clean. All of the things like the dressings, which are typically associated with luxury spaces, you know, the dressings of the bed, the throws, the pillows, all of these kinds of things are not seen necessarily as safe any longer. So, because how often do those get cleaned? How often do they, and from an operational point of view, it's just so time consuming to manage that. So I see that fundamentally changing going forward. From a material choice, from a design perspective, from becoming simple luxury, where service and actually that what we spoke about, personalized service, actually becomes the luxury. So, you know, one of the things that our research institute had commented on was that luxury travel, you know, people who had tended to travel to luxury venues were more inclined, the percentage was extraordinarily high of that group who would travel again, because they perceived at the luxury end, cleanliness and finishes and the service was, the expectation was that there would be more attention than in the, you know, in the offerings that were perhaps simpler. But even the luxury offerings locally in terms of safety, every single facility that we're looking at now across, again, all disciplines, every discipline is about how we can actually design surfaces, how we can use materials that are self-cleaning. Antimicrobial has its benefits and pluses and not pluses, but all of these kinds of things to be considered as part of the design. I don't think that's going to change. I think, you know, that's going to, there's so much more awareness now, especially, you know, talking to some of the key players, the operators, where they're looking particularly at things like, you know, air quality and water quality being the two elements that is fundamentally being addressed, which I think is great.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive takeaway from all of that. Great. Thank you, Diane. I think that wraps up my questions for you. So very much appreciate your time. It was brilliant having you on our talk. And was there anything you wanted to add or?
Well, I think, you know, just that, well, first of all, thank you so much. You know, I think this is so great to hear questions, and I think this is such a wonderful initiative because it just expands our thinking, and we share ideas and we share insights, and hopefully this drives changes. It drives innovation, and I think, you know, it creates opportunities that we can really, you know, focus on. I think regionally, we have an extraordinary ecosystem, which is not only, you know, just our nature. We have such a diverse and complex ecosystem in different little sectors, each with their own character and nuances, and I think, you know, the sensitivity to that is really wonderful. And, you know, the opportunity to really create those absolutely unique experiences, I think, is in our hands to shape. So kudos to you and your team for doing an extraordinary job on that front. And thank you again for this conversation and interesting questions.
Thank you very much, Diane. And I have to say, very well spoken, and thank you for the nod. That wraps up our talk today, everybody. Thanks for joining, and see you at the next talk. Bye.
Thank you, Mark. Bye.